Hello everybody, this is Professor Triplet, and it's time to look at how to do trim for Windows. Alright, so if anybody's taken any classes with me before, they always know that I'm huge on finding reference. So that's the first thing we're going to do before we do anything else, is we're going to find what trim do we want to make. Now here I've looked up crown molding, and that's typically the profile that you get along the top by a ceiling, but there's some interesting cuts, and I thought this would be kind of cool to show some of the kind of 3D things you can do with it. For instance, here's somebody's decorative crown molding they've done in 3D. Here's another one, and these are pretty intricate pieces, a little bit more advanced for this than this tutorial is going to be, but we're going to get started on like the step one of how to do the actual curvy parts. So let's look at this other search that I did here, which was window trim profiles. So if you do a window trim profile search, you'll find all kinds of different profiles that are examples of window trim. And of course, after looking at these for a while, you can basically dissect them, and you could decide to really make your own if you wanted to, or you could just copy a pattern that you find online. So for this case, we're actually going to copy a pattern, just because a lot of these are well established and they can be made with lathes and I should say routers, not lathes per se, but routers, and you know, there'll be things that are basically recognizable by the eye. But in the end, we're going to come out with something similar to this, and then we're going to talk about how to cut it at a 45-degree angle so that you can basically connect a few of these together to make a window shape. The next thing let's look at is this. So here's an actual diagram cut of a window, of how windows are constructed. And as 3D modelers, we're not necessarily concerned with modeling everything we see per se, but modeling the stuff that you would see on the surface that's going to make it look realistic. So typically, for our purposes, we're going to want the moldings that are around the outside, maybe you know, the actual windowsill, the apron, you know, and if you're doing the window as well, you may want to do the rest of these pieces. Now, the one thing I'm going to say in the beginning, though, is that I see time and time again when people are beginning modeling that they try to model everything out of one piece of geometry, and I want people to get away from that, please. So realistically, when you're modeling this, if you were to take this example, for instance, this piece right here is its own unique piece, and then this block right here is unique, and then this is a unique piece. Now, this piece on top and this side piece are probably the same shape, same profile. So you could basically make one and then duplicate it over to here. But you don't need to build this and then actually connect the side block to it, because even in the real world, there would actually be no connection to these two. They would be two separate pieces. One would be used, they would use like trim nails to nail this into the wall, and they would do the same thing with this. They would somehow nail it, and maybe if it you know, had a nail hole, they would put some putty in it or something like that to cover it up. So please don't think about this as something you have to build as one piece. It's actually separate pieces. Same thing for like tracks. If you wanted to make it look really interesting, you would put some tracks in here, some grooves up here, even these little pieces here that go across the window. I guess you could call that a lattice. Typically the lattice are not even connected in every window either. I've had windows where they weren't connected. They were just pieces that kind of were jammed into the main frame around the window. So you could even see here's a piece, and then this is a piece here. These are separate pieces. So I just want to bring that up because so many people try to make stuff all out of one piece, and I want people to get away from having to do that, because it actually makes your life a lot harder when you're modeling. Just basically break it up into logical sections. So the way it's made in the real world is sometimes the way you actually model it, the same pieces would be modeled. All right, now that I'm done preaching that, we've looked at the references, so let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop. All right, here we are in Photoshop, and I've got a reference that I chose because I felt like this was really, really good and clear cut for doing a tutorial. There's basically a casing, and that is the perimeter around the window. There's an apron, so that's this piece down here, that's number 3, and then of course the stool, which is, I'm not quite sure if it's this little piece right in here or if it's this piece for the windowsill. I'm assuming it's this little piece down here. But regardless, you can kind of see clear cut like what these pieces are shaped like. They've got decent profiles, but we just have to set these up so we can use them. But I like this example, and it's pretty simple. It's nothing too complex for starting. So let's go ahead and make our reference. So we're going to go and make a new document. So Control N for making a new document. Let's try it again. Control N. There we go. Okay. And so I'm going to make it 512 by 512. Make sure it's pixels. Okay. And then the resolution would be 72. And we can name this ref underscore casing 01, something like that. Okay, let's hit enter, and there we have our 512 by 512 texture. So let's come back here, and we'll go ahead and get our marquee tool out, which is this, or you can hit M on your keyboard and just marquee around the first one, and then just Control C, and then we can come back over to here, Control V, and so it just drops it into a new layer. And then we can go ahead and free transform, which is Control T, and you'll get this bounding box. Now you see, as I move around the bounding box, if I'm further away, I have kind of these little arrows. Those arrows are telling me that I can rotate. So if I go ahead and hold Shift and start rotating, it'll actually snap. If I don't hold Shift, it'll actually kind of just free rotate, but I don't want that, so I'm going to Control Z. I want to hold Shift, and then it'll snap to 15-degree increments. And so I want my rotation to be kind of like this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to size this so that the top goes up to here. Now, you'll notice that my my aspect ratio remains the same. Well, the reason why it's doing that is because I'm holding Shift. If I let go of Shift, I can actually stretch it like that, but I don't want to do that, so I'll undo. I hold Shift, and I can stretch this up like so. And then keep holding Shift, and I can stretch it down like this. So there we go. Get this basically right where we want it. And that looks good. I'm going to hit Enter on my keyboard. So you can either hit Enter, there's like a little check mark up here. And you'll notice I have my rulers out. If you don't have your rulers out, I'm going to hit Control R. You can get your rulers out. And if you scroll your cursor over the ruler bar, you can click and drag. And you can drag out a center point, so it'll usually snap by default. So it's snapping right there, that's the center point. If you're not getting a snap, then you can go to View, and you can turn your snap on right here. It's also got a hotkey for that. That is actually one hotkey I did not know before this. So anyway, so once you snap to the center, then what you're going to want to do is take this piece, and you can hit V on your keyboard so you can get your move tool, or if you're under another tool like the marquee tool like we were, you can actually hold Control, and that'll bring up your move tool, and you can just slide this over so that we're basically getting this right there or so, because we're going to kind of use the inside of the profile to the outside of this profile, kind of like that. Okay, so we're good to go. Let's go ahead and just save this, Control S. And I don't want a Photoshop file, I'm actually going to just make a JPEG, and it should name it the right name, and I'll say save. And for a reference, it doesn't even have to be big, you can make it smaller if you want, it doesn't really matter. I'm just saving a JPEG because it's a reference, we just need something to see in the file, and JPEGs are nice and light on the system because they're small. Okay, so next we're going to jump into Maya. And you can see I already have one here, but I'm going to show you how I got there. Okay, so I'm going to make a plane, and I want my plane to be the same dimensions as we had in Photoshop. So look at the dimensions here. It says 4 inches by 8 1/8. Well, we want to get it to be 4 by 4 so that these will be basically the same size. So if I go to the famous interwebs, and I go to the Google I could go ahead and go and type in inches to centimeters, and you'll get this little box here, and you put in 4, and it says 10.6. So I can copy that, go back to Maya, and then in our polyplane, we just can type that in. Control V, hit enter, and there you go. Now we have the right size. Let's change this to 1, and basically that's the size that we're going to want. Okay, so now you just want to make a new material. So right-click and hold over your plane and go New Material. And you want to make a Lambert. And then we'll want to drop something on here. And so we'll hit File. Click this, and we'll find our texture. Hit OK. And look at that. We're basically ready to go to draw a curve and make our profile. So let's get going with that. We'll do that in the next tutorial.